So we're very, very pleased to welcome Victor Postemski to the conversation, particularly in this time of transition, as he just took up new residence and a new job in San Francisco. So, Victor, good luck and thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you for having me tonight.
Great to have you, Victor. And this is Jim Smith. And I also want to welcome everybody for joining the conversation tonight. And as Marianne mentioned, I think she mentioned, in about a half hour, you'll all be able to offer your own questions for Victor. So you see the question and answer box there. You can click on that and then just type in your question for Victor in the last half hour of the show. We're gonna hear from you. So we're looking forward to that. But in the meantime, again, Victor, thanks for showing up in the midst of such craziness in your life, having moved from Boston to San Francisco. And as y'all know, we've billed this show as featuring a guest who is young, plus gay, plus Catholic, and I'm presuming, Victor, you haven't become Mormon in the meantime.
No, still Catholic.
Still Catholic, and I want to ask why you've sort of retained that description for yourself. What continues to attract you to Catholicism, and maybe start with this question in regard to that. As you look at your past, are there people in your past that have planted seeds such that you sort of carry Catholicism in your bones? People or events and experiences in your life that have been important, sort of formers of your spirituality and your Catholicism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of things that keep me Catholic, and I think I always tell people sometimes I think it's harder to come out as Catholic to friends and others than it is to come out as gay, especially even just being a gay Catholic. I think for me, just my undeniable belief that there is a God, that our God is great, our God loves us regardless of whether you're gay, you're straight, you're bisexual, regardless of any of these little boxes or things we try to put ourselves in. I mean, after all, God created each and every one of us in God's image, and so to me, I just don't feel as though I can make pretend or say that God doesn't exist, or that the Catholic Church is evil, or any of the other really negative things I think that we hear about our church, especially because we might identify as LGBT or even questioning. I think I tend to look at history because I'm a student of history, and also from a realistic point of view in the sense that our church is run by human beings, and we were all created with original sin, and we were all created to make mistakes and not necessarily treat each other the way God and Jesus would want us to. And so I think I kind of separate our hierarchy, the church's hierarchy, and push them to the side, and really think and believe that the church really for me are those who are in our pews, our family and friends, and I really just don't feel like I need to hear from somebody who's just as flawed as I am that I'm going to hell because I'm gay, or all of those other terrible things that I think we hear from some of our church officials. And I think the sad thing too is that a lot of what we're hearing is probably coming from an incredibly small minority of church leaders. I think there's probably a lot of church leaders out there, priests and sisters, and and even bishops and cardinals who would rather we start focusing on the social justice mission of our church, and taking care of the flock rather than whipping the flock. But I think that's something we can talk about later on. In terms of someone who's really impacted my faith, without question, I would give that credit to my grandmother. She was a devout Catholic. Went to church every day. Would bring my brother and I to church on a regular basis because we didn't always go to church a lot when we were kids. My parents didn't always bring us. They did make us go to CCD class, which I hated until confirmation for some reason. But my grandmother, she always struck me as someone who was a different Catholic from what I think I was hearing others say. She was progressive in her views. She used to tell me, I think priests should be allowed to get married. I think women should be allowed to be priests. And then later on in life, we never had a direct conversation about it, but I think we were watching a TV program, and she's like, I don't understand why the church is yelling and screaming about gay people getting married. She's like, I've been married for 55 plus years and I'm miserable. So let everybody get married. But, she was certainly joking. But I mean, the point being really is that, I think she was ahead of her time in a lot of ways. And that had a really strong impact on me. And so, I moved to Boston in 2002 at the height of the church sex abuse crisis. And every day you would open up the Boston Globe, and there was really just some nasty thing being written about, the Catholic Church and, the church blaming the sex abuse crisis on gay men. And I knew that just wasn't right, wasn't correct. And I had like a crisis of faith at that point. I really just wasn't sure if I wanted to continue going to church. And I said to myself, I'm like, I can't walk into church anymore and hear this kind of talk, or know that women can't be fully included in the church, or my personal belief at the time, and still is that I felt priests should be allowed to get married. And then I found Dignity, and that was, I think, really a really big turning point for me, and really just, I think, helped build my faith, as a young adult at that point, because I was really starting to just turn away from the church and just be like, I'm done. I'm a recovering Catholic, or I'm a non-practicing Catholic, or whatever word people use to describe themselves. When they leave the church in that way.
And let's return to your place at Dignity and how that experience has been in a bit here. But I want to just hearken to your conviction about who is church. Church is not just the hierarchy, and the church is full of flawed humans, whether lay or ordained or religious. But that conviction that the church is not just our leaders, is not just the few voices that have some stridence and some sort of willful ignorance in their teaching. But that conviction is going to come in handy for you now that you're in San Francisco and you're living in the Archdiocese of San Francisco that's just welcomed its new Archbishop Corleone, who is known as the father of Prop 8, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine it's going to be hard for you and for many Catholics in the Bay Area to sort of endure this leader's focus on LGBT dignity and rights. And so anyway, that conviction is going to come in handy for you, I think, to see him in his place, to see him with the perspective that he is one of many people in this church. But let me ask you this. If you run into the guy and you've got 5 minutes with him, what would you say to him?
I would certainly hope and that I would just be a polite gentleman like I always am, and not want to just belt off something really mean and nasty. But I think for me, I would really want to let him know that his words hurt, not just me, but people of all ages, young people, younger than me. I mean, we have, teenagers, little kids hearing these really hurtful things, and that is just setting themselves up for a lot of pain that really is unnecessary. And whether you whether he agrees that gay people are whatever he believes or not, I think he needs to remember that we are human. We all are created in God's image, and we need to be treated with dignity and respect, like we would anyone else. So I'd want to make sure that that was clear to him. But then I think I'd certainly stand on my soapbox and scream pretty loudly, just to be like, you're on the wrong side of history here, buddy. Everybody in the pews, more than, what is it, like 70%? I mean, you keep seeing all of these numbers being published that the people in the pews, all of us Catholics, we support our LGBT brothers and sisters, and their right for civil marriage, and even many for religious marriage as well. And so I don't know if it's just maybe he's bored and there's not much else for him to rant and rail about. But you know what? Walking around the streets of San Francisco the past 2 days, I see a lot of folks who could use some tender love and care from their church. And I think
I just lost you, Victor. You're back.
sorry about that. It literally just shut right off and then came
All
right
right,
back.
let's hope that doesn't happen again. But
I know. So no, I think what I was finishing up saying is that, I think that I'd love to remind him that the focus, it really needs, there's so many other areas within our world of suffering that, need to be addressed. And he really just needs to stop contributing to the suffering of so many people, throughout the world.
good,
It's just,
good words.
what would Jesus do is one thing that I always, remember from Catholic school. And, Jesus dined with tax collectors and prostitutes and, people that society considered, less than. And I think we need to remember that teaching, and he needs to as well.
Yeah, good words. Thank you. You described to me in a previous conversation an experience you had when you were a student leader at your Catholic college, and it seemed to me like an experience where you found your voice as a LGBT advocate in the church. Can you describe to the folks who have logged in tonight that experience? It was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think you hit it right on the head. That's really, I think, the time when my, sexual orientation and faith collided for me. And I've just never been somebody to sit there and be like, oh, well, this is terrible that this is happening. We should do something, and then turn and look and see if somebody's going to do something. I think for me, I've always just been raised to be a leader, to speak out. Sometimes I talk too much, but hey, you know what? It's like one of the gifts God gave me, so people have to deal with it. But when I was a junior in college, we were going to have the local bishop installed in the archdiocese on our campus, and I was president of our LGBT student group in a Catholic college. It was a group that I had founded, and we had a bulletin board that really was pretty innocent. It just said Gay Straight Alliance. There was some kind of saying, from scripture or something, just, reaffirming to others that, we're Catholic as well. And, like we're not these degenerates that people say we are. And it was just this innocent bulletin board. And I'd gotten a phone call from some administrators on campus who said, we want to take your bulletin board down because we're afraid that it's going to offend people in Rome when they come to campus. Well, that just set me over the edge. The people in Rome don't pay my tuition. And so I was flabbergasted. And I was a member of student government. And so, I was just an activist in that way. And I was just so upset about this. And so I demanded a meeting with this administrator and with some of my colleagues. And we met for about an hour to discuss, why we didn't think this was appropriate to do. And it really they really had already made the decision that they wanted to take this bulletin board down. And this was really innocent. Yeah, it's just a bulletin board. But to me, it was just the principle that you wanted to take it down just because it had the words LGBT on there. And that bothered me. What about some other bulletin boards on campus? Are you going to be upset about the fraternities bulletin board, or somebody talking about? I mean, there are many things on a college campus that can be offensive to others. Having worked in college campuses myself, so I demanded a meeting. We met. The decision was made. I loud mouthed and I said, "Well, I demand to meet with the president." And she had said, "Okay, let me give him a call." And about 30 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the president's office with, the dean of students and two other folks. And we were really just talking about, how we were offended and really hurt by, somebody's decision to just cover this bulletin board that we thought was really simple and innocent. And he had a really great explanation about, he gave a story about, some rabbis that he had worked with at a conference in Auschwitz, the concentration camp in Poland, and some of the symbolism behind, Catholicism and the difficulties that it posed for some of these rabbis, and how it was just present on the table. And they didn't even want to sit at the head table at this event because of that. And he explained that he had to just kind of swallow his pride and make some compromises. And so, in the spirit of compromise, I had said, well, if you're going to cover our bulletin board, I think you need to cover every single other bulletin board on campus, so that we don't offend those people in Rome. And before that, I even started pulling out, the little bits and tenets of, Catholic social teaching that are in our mission statement to support our group, because, they're really big on pushing mission and why we do what we do at the institution. So I tied it all back. And he agreed, and he said, hey, you know what? We will cover every single bulletin board. And I also threw out there that I was not going to cover the bulletin boards. So they had a bunch of other staff members, going around the institution. And so there was red paper covering every bulletin board throughout campus for that. So, I mean, it was a compromise, but it was also very painful for me. I remember 2 days later, as a member of student government, I was supposed to go as a member to represent the students at the installation. And I just had a meltdown. I was in my office in student government. I was reading in the paper about how in Connecticut at the time they were having some discussions in the legislature about legalizing same-sex marriage. And the bishop from my home diocese had testified, and I had read that information. And that just, between that and the episode that I had that previous weekend, it just really, really upset me. And, I was just in tears about it. It was really the first time I felt like the church did not love me as a Catholic, but also as a gay Catholic. And I never had experienced that before. I had heard others, talk about the pain and experiences they've had, but it never happened to me before. And that was my time. And so, it was probably fitting that 2 years later or 3 years later, I found myself in Boston, looking for dignity, because I think that may have started me on my path of, I don't know if this whole being gay and Catholic piece is going to work out. It just didn't seem like it could, because everything that everybody was saying was, oh, no, you can't be gay and Catholic. Are you kidding me? That's a sin. And you would just hear all that, and that was too
So
much.
what did you find at the Dignity Boston community that obviously inspired you? What did you find there?
I found a lot, and Dignity Boston tends to be one of our more progressive chapters, I think, throughout Dignity USA, and that was something I was looking for. And when I had gone there, we had a lay-led liturgy going on, and there was a man and a woman up at the altar, and I said to myself, oh my God, this is Vatican III. This is wonderful. I mean, it was just great for me, and I was really excited. But what I really found there was a sense of community, of people who, regardless of who you are and what you look like and what you say and do, you're just welcome there. And that was just really contrary to some of the messages that I was seeing from, some of our church leaders. And so I instantly really felt very comfortable. Everybody in the community there, super sweet and loving and warm and affirming. So, I mean, I can definitely tell you when I had my last liturgy at Dignity Boston like 2 weeks ago, it was really, really sad for me because I did feel like I was leaving my extended family. Because I really do feel like Dignity Boston is my extended family. They really are. I love everybody in that chapter. Um, and so that's really what has helped sustain me. I really do feel as if I did not find dignity, I probably, again, like I said before, would have abandoned the church at this point and just been like, yeah, I believe in God, but
Hmm.
I don't subscribe to an organized religion.
Hmm. So now that you're in San Francisco, what do you think you'll do? You're without your beloved community.
Yeah, I know, I know. Well, it's funny because I have, looked around the country for different jobs and things like that throughout my life, and I've always said to myself, well, if I do move to a city other than Boston, it needs to have a Dignity chapter, or I need to find a bunch of Catholics so we can create one because we need to continue that. And I'm just going to reset real fast, and I'll be right.
Okay. Yep. Well, it looks like we had a little bit of a freezing problem that can happen with this web technology, and we'll see how it improves. Hello again,
All
Victor.
right. Thank
Thank you.
you. I hope everybody can hear me better again. Um, So for me, I was out here in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, finalizing a few things for what would eventually be my move, and snuck out and went over to Dignity San Francisco to give it a try. And
Hmm.
so I think I'm gonna continue going to Dignity San Francisco because I know that I'm not gonna sit in the pews and potentially hear something that's gonna just send me over the edge. So I'm definitely continuing my time with Dignity.
Hmm.
There's just something special about all of our chapters and the community nationwide, and I think without question the Holy Spirit is just working through us, and I want to continue to be a part of that. So I'm definitely going to continue on with Dignity San Francisco, and pretty much any chapter that I can find if I'm not here.
You'll be a fantastic addition no matter where you are, what community you find yourself in. So glad to hear you've
Thank you.
connected out there in San Francisco. You know, you're young, but you don't represent every young adult Catholic
Right.
that exists here in the 21st century. But I want to pick your brain. We've seen such an exodus from the church of young people. They
Yeah.
finish their sacraments of initiation and confirmation and start disappearing. Um, in your opinion and experience working with young adults, college age young adults, what do you think that's about? I mean, it's about a lot of
Yeah.
things, but do you think it's a crisis of our organized religion, or do you think it's a crisis of faith? Um, what do you think's going on in a big way among young people?
Jim, that's a really great question. I think, not just the Catholic Church, but if you speak with other church leaders throughout, I think the country or the world, a lot of mainline churches are having the same problem. I think there's a bunch of issues at play here. I think a large part of it is the hypocrisy. You see and hear all these negative things about gays and lesbians, how we shouldn't be allowed to get married and we shouldn't be able to adopt children because of X, Y, and Z. And then this young adult person looks and says, well, I've got two moms, I've got two dads, or my brother's gay, or my aunt's gay, my uncle's gay. And he or she is not this evil person that you make them out to be. Matter of fact, they may have raised that person or had a really significant impact on them and their growth and development. And so, a lot of what they're hearing just doesn't add up. I also think, there's a lot of negativity around divorce and separation. And, if we look at a lot of young adults today, They may have grown up in single family homes,
Mm-hmm.
and may not necessarily feel represented by the church leadership and the information that they're sharing or that they're preaching about. So I sometimes I wonder if we had a switch, if maybe the Pope just tomorrow, I don't know, turned around and instead of in his New Year's speech say gay marriage is the biggest threat to the human race, maybe saying, well, those gays are, golly, they're great and they should be able to get married.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would love to see that. I know maybe it's a pipe dream at this point. Certainly in the future, I think things are going to change. They certainly are changing already. But I do think that is having an impact on a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, in terms of, working with other young adults in college settings,
Yeah.
those who don't, consider themselves a part of an organized religion, still consider themselves believers in God
Mm-hmm.
or spiritual. So they might not attend regular church services, but they
Mm-hmm.
may pray on their own. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they'll go to just like an Ash Wednesday service, or they'll maybe attend a funeral service for friends or something like that. So they take, I think, maybe I've seen them take a less busy, I don't want to say busy approach, but they're maybe not as active as their parents or grandparents were, where they felt an obligation to go to church every single Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we also live in a really busy world, so I think a lot of people might just be easy to say, hey, you know what, I just don't want to go to church anymore. I don't want to deal with this. I don't have time for this. I think it's a cop out, but that's just me.
It's interesting. We look at we older folks look at the young and say, oh, their world is too full of distractions. With their
Yeah,
smartphones and all the technology that's in front of folks. But I've been finding myself of late bringing my smartphone to my prayer time, in the
yeah,
morning, because
yep,
I can't be that distant from texts and
right.
from emails, and that's just crazy. So I think the distractions that really do present an obstruction to our sort of deepening faith life and our being present to ourselves and present to others and present to God, don't just affect young people, but they're affecting all of us. And
I agree. I agree.
let me ask you this, dovetailing on that issue. For all of us, there's room to deepen our faith in the God who calls each of us beloved and who calls us to a purpose in every day of our lives. Victor, how are you called to walk more firmly in faith and in your purpose of living? Are there specific practices that you're drawn to in order to sort of remember who you are and why you're here? What are the ways you're feeling called to deepen in your own faith life?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. In some ways, I feel a calling to help educate other people that you can be LGBT and Catholic,
Hmm.
that they're not separate, and that God loves you no matter who you are or what you've done. Um, and so in a lot of ways, I feel like that's what also helps sustain my, work in Dignity USA. I mean, I'm on the national board of directors, and I feel that helps give me that platform to help educate others and try to bring them in the fold and let them know that, no, you're not alone. That a lot of us struggle with, rectifying our sexual orientation with our religion, and that, yes, you can, be both of those things. Um, in terms of things that I do, I like to try to, if I'm going on a long trip and I'm driving or something like that, sometimes I still pray the rosary when I drive,
Mm-hmm.
um, just as a way to pass time, especially if I'm looking for some quiet time to kind of just reflect or at least clear my head.
Mm-hmm.
With a lot of the work that I do for my career, there's a lot going on, and so I find that helps me refocus. Um, Something that probably should do a lot more of, and I think I probably don't because, like you said, the distractions are always there.
Yeah.
For a lot of us.
I love that you include your ministry to GLBT persons and sort of affirming their dignity and making the connection between the goodness of who they are and their faith life, that's not a disconnect, and their church,
Right,
that's
right.
not a disconnect. I love that you see that ministry as a part of your spirituality and your spiritual practice. That's very cool. We
Well,
have go ahead.
oh no, I just want to add to that. I mean, I think part of it too is it's like, I had some difficulties with, balancing all this out myself, and it's almost like, well, hey, I've walked this path. If I can help
Right.
just one person figure some of this out and know that, they're not this monster that they keep reading about or hearing about, then hey, hopefully that helps someone.
Yeah, what you've been given, give as a gift. So you're just passing
Right,
it
right.
on. That's cool.
Pay it forward.
Um, it's time for your questions, and apparently we have 6 questions already that have been asked. The first one here up on the screen. Delphin from Miami asks, as a young Catholic, Victor, what legacy do you feel we have inherited in the LGBTQ movement, and where do you think we need to go?
Delphine, that is a great question. In a lot of ways, I feel more blessed than some of the folks who came before me. I mean, I'm living in a society now, today, where in a few states, same sex marriage is legalized. That push is changing and growing. Live in a country where you're not persecuted anymore for being gay. The president of the United States can come out in support of same sex marriage and still get reelected. I mean, these were just things that were unheard of even 10 years ago. And again, like I said before, I'm a student of history. And so, reading what life was like for a young LGBT person, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and how difficult that was because of the constant discrimination. I feel, though, because they sacrificed so much and worked really hard to bring us where we are, that we need to pick up that mantle and continue to pay it forward and continue to work and make sure that those who struggled, didn't struggle for nothing. And I think we are starting to see that. There's so much going on at the national level, just in terms of making LGBT people more inclusive and equal and just under the law. And that's exciting to me. And I think that's great. And I think that's something, we all have an obligation to do, since, others before us did a lot more heavy lifting to clear the way for the benefits that some of us have now.
And Irma from Glenarm, Maryland asks, she says, I've worked hard at helping to achieve marriage equality in Maryland. Way to go, Irma. Does Dignity have a program that is designed to help the young queer members to prepare carefully when they plan to be married? The older folks that have been together for many years are already knowledgeable and used to each other, and they know what they are getting into. So what about the impetuous youngsters?
Great question. I'm not aware that we have any type of program designed to help young adults, when they're planning to be married. But the fact that this is happening really quickly means that we all might need to start something soon. Because I think we'd all benefit from, some sort of like that pre-marriage counseling to just talk through, the commitment that you're going to be making with that person that you love. I know that, when I'm in that position myself someday, I'd like to be able to call on some people, to kind of hear their experiences and hear their advice and guidance. And I think there's a lot of great couples throughout Dignity USA land where, that would be helpful. I mean, I'm just thinking about a lot of my friends and couples in Dignity Boston that, gosh, if I was in that position, I'd take them out to dinner and be like, let's talk, because, you've got some experiences I'm sure I could benefit from hearing.
That's a really interesting point. It would be pretty cool to lift up some of the couples in Dignity across the nation and ask them to be mentors, or give them the floor, invite them onto a QCF show sometime. So
Right.
That's a great idea, Victor. So Bob Mielovich from Washington, D.C. asks, Victor, can you say something about the needs and desires of a young adult in Dignity? How do they differ from others, from everyone else? Why have a young adult caucus?
Really great question. I think there's a lot of things that I can say about this area. I think the whole why do we need a young adult caucus is really you like to see people that look like you or are like you. And so I think for a lot of young adults, it's important for them to see other young Catholics like yourselves in chapters. And so I think by having a young adult caucus, it does help do this mentality of if you build it, they will come. I'm thinking about the convention in San Francisco in 2009 when we had about 4 or 5 young adults in attendance. And then the convention in Washington, D.C. A few years ago had like 25 or 26. And that was all because we had a young adult caucus that was really working to try to organize and get more young people to, the conventions. And I think part of that has to happen because, you know what others are looking for and what they're desiring. I think what young adults are looking for from Dignity and maybe from church, and this is anecdotal. This is from what I've heard,
Hmm.
especially when we had our meeting in Newark, New Jersey, when the Young Adult Caucus and the USA Board, we gathered 24 young adults from our chapters across the country, and many things that we heard were young adults do like the rituals behind our church, that helps sustain them. Young adults don't have that same connection to Vatican II and the rebellious nature that Vatican II had for a lot of our members in Dignity USA right now. And so I think that's where we may have a generational divide.
Hmm.
A lot of young adults just they've never experienced all of Vatican II changes, and
Hmm.
to them, I mean, this was something that happened 20, 30, 40 years before they were even born.
Hmm.
And so there's that big difference there. And so I think that's something, that chapters and churches need to really give some thought to when they're thinking about how they can get more young adults to their chapters.
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting point because that Vatican II was such an empowering
Right.
event that still has the power to inspire progressive Catholics to keep on keeping on. And the fact that young people, that's not in their history, doesn't serve as quite the empowerment. What other sort of resources are out there for young people to be inspired by? That's you. I don't know
Right.
if you were
Right.
making that point, Victor, but that's the reflection I had when in hearing you speak. So, Delphine,
Right.
again, how do you weave together your passion for justice with spirituality? So, what holds you up in the struggle? So, you mentioned
Yeah.
praying the rosary while you're traveling. That could be one example of how your spirituality sort of feeds your activism. Any other ideas?
Again, I keep going back to this, but I think the fact that I have always, in my young adult life, had access to, other LGBT Catholics through Dignity, that has helped sustain me.
Hmm.
I've always had a sounding board, always somebody to talk to, and say, how did you handle this when you were growing up? Or, what was this like for you? Because life is a lot different today than maybe, a couple of decades ago. And so, again, I've just really benefited from having a chapter available to me, and a lot of great people who, just want to see you be successful and involved in the life of our church
Mm.
and our organization.
Yeah, the importance of relationships that support us, that hold us up. Amen.
Hmm.
Again, folks, your chance to lift up questions that you have in mind for Victor. I'd say he's doing a dang good job of responding. And here's one from Daniel in Toledo. I'm a young, recent convert to Catholicism, was confirmed this past Easter. Welcome, Daniel. and am active in my parish life and in the LGBT community in my city. However, I tend to keep this side of myself pretty separate from each other.
Yeah.
Without an LGBT community like Dignity in my area, what are some suggestions on how to integrate these two identities? Great question.
Well, Daniel, first off, congratulations on your confirmation. I think that's really exciting. And, given all that I think we hear from the church that's not empowering for LGBT people, it's great to know that people are still going to our church, because there are wonderful things about our church that get lost in the shuffle with what people are saying. You know, um, what can you do to help, integrate some of these identities? I think part of it is, I don't know if you're on a college campus, maybe you are, and you have a Newman Center, or some kind of a Catholic student group on your campus. I know I'm going to generalize when I say this, but you tend to find, some more moderate to liberal thinkers, amongst some of those groups, and so you might find some folks who would be more supportive of, your two identities. You may even find some folks who, not as out as you are, where they're kind of in the closet still, and but their faith is really important to them, and so they're still trying to figure that out. Um, that's one of the suggestions I would have. I also think, even though if you don't have a local chapter, I think, getting connected to the Young Adult Caucus within USA is really important. Find us on Facebook or our website. We're always sending things out on the internet. And then if you can, hop on over to Minneapolis this coming summer for the convention. I mean, I'm not just trying to plug that, but I mean, that is just an incredible, incredible experience. And, talking with a lot of the young people at the last convention, they were on cloud nine for weeks after they left the convention. And I know I was too, because it was really just an incredible uplifting experience.
Good, good, good. It's good responses, good ideas, Victor. Jenny from Diamond Bar, California. When you mentioned your meltdown, Victor, I really feel like you were telling my own story. I have finally said out loud, I don't know if I want to continue to be a part of this church. I am a mother of a gay son. I have been very active in the MLGC ministry for 6 years. My main reason for not leaving is because I know I am making a positive change in people's lives. My biggest concern is for the young people hearing these conflicting messages from the church. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, Jenny, keep fighting the good fight. I think the fact that you're trying to have an impact on others, and you're a mom, people respond well to mothers. I mean, we all love our mothers, but knowing that you have a gay son and that you're really working hard to make the life easier for a lot of other people, is really exciting. And it is tough. We all continue to have our meltdowns and our challenges with all of this, but I think finding others that we can talk to about this is always important. A friend, a sibling, just to say, gosh, I'm really, really tired of this and I'm really frustrated. We all get burnt out. All leaders do. But I think at the end of the day, we know we're fighting the good fight, and that God and the Holy Spirit are on our side. So we'll still make it happen. It's just slower than we'd like. Sometimes we want to tell the Holy Spirit and God to move it along, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Oh, Delphine again. I was gonna pop in with a question, but Delphine beat me to it. Dignity has been a prophetic voice and a pastoral presence for many of us. As a leader within Dignity, where are the growing places for us? How can we take our mission for inclusivity to the next level?
Yeah.
Give us an answer.
From what I'm seeing, I think we're starting. We have a lot more women who are becoming involved in our Dignity chapters across the country. We certainly had a lot more women at the last convention as well, and I think that's because our message of we are an inclusive church, and if you are male, female, transgender, or however you identify, you'll be welcome here. I think that's getting out there. I also think we're starting to see a lot more straight couples, parents of LGBT kids, or just straight people in general, who they're tired of hearing some of this negativity as well. So I think there's some room for growth there for us as well, in terms of getting some other folks into the church and letting them know that there are alternatives to this negativity and this pain that's being spewed by others.
I'd love that question, and keep maybe folks who are attending can offer some answers too in the chat box, because that's a great question that we continue to need to answer. Our executive director from Dignity, what does Victor most value from Catholicism?
You know, our tradition of social justice within the church, I think, is incredibly important and very powerful. I myself, feel as though I need to do more to help those that are less fortunate than me. I mean, I'm blessed in many ways, and I need to remind myself that on really awful days that it could be much more worse. So I think the social justice traditions of our church are really important, and it's something that we do really, really well. And it kind of, I don't say it kind of bothers me. It does bother me when I see our leaders straying from that and spending money in areas like ballot initiatives when, that money can go towards helping that homeless person, have a meal or a place to sleep tonight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions that people want to surface before we slow down here? We've got about 5 more minutes with Victor before Marianne comes back on to offer a few words before we close. But let us know if you have any further questions. This is in relation to Delphine's question about how we can deepen our commitment to inclusivity within Dignity communities. How about to young adults, Victor? What 2 or 3 things might we do better to attract and sustain young adults? I mean, that number is growing, but we ought never be satisfied.
Great question. It's going to take a lot of hard work. It really does. And, I hate to say the whole line of, when you build it, they will come. But I think that's part of it. I think finding someone who's going to be that lone ranger, because that's how it usually starts. It's this one young adult that shows up to a chapter who says, well, I want to continue, but I don't see anybody here who looks like me or, has the same generational experiences as I do. And it takes trying to rope that person in and saying, we really want to work and get more people here, but people need to see others like them in the pews. I also think trying to do as much outreach as possible, whether it's through colleges and universities or youth groups, that's one way to do it. Some areas have done better with that and others haven't. And part of it is I think a lot of people just don't really have the time maybe to devote towards trying to attract more folks in their chapters. So even at maybe the chapter level, putting somebody in charge of brainstorming or working on some of these initiatives, I think is a start. And then when you do have some folks coming in, asking them, what was your first impression like when you walked through the doors? Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel safe? Were you happy? Something that we should do differently? Because I think it's also really easy for a lot of us to continue to do the same thing over and over again in terms of the way we present ourselves and our chapters and our services to others. And again, I think it's important to remember the generational divide there, and asking what others want and need when they get here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mark Matson from Columbus, Ohio asks, Victor, there's about 25 years difference between us. I'm curious how similar or different are your reasons to mine for attaching yourself to local and national dignity. So if you know Mark well enough, Victor, you can surmise what those similarities or differences are, perhaps,
Yep.
and comment on that.
Sure. Mark, I want to say that you're still a spring chicken, so relax. In a lot of ways, I think we do have a lot of similarities, regardless of age. And I think part of that is finding a home in a community that supports and accepts our faith and our sexual orientation as one. And I think that's really that's literally the first thing that's attracted me to dignity, and that's really what's kept me there. I don't see any alternatives within our mainstream church that are appropriate or going to meet my needs, because the ones that I do see are, well, we're going to minister to you as a gay person, but we can't have you march in those parades, or maybe you don't kiss your partner at church. Not going to fly with me. I'm not going back in the closet for these things. And so knowing that I have that type of resource for me is what's really kept me there. And I suspect that's something that's kept you involved in Dignity for all these years, and many of our members. We've been around for 40 plus years now, and I suspect we're going to be around for another 40 or more.
Amen. Hey, Victor, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Really, you got a marvelous mind and heart, and grateful to have you on. As Marianne prepares herself to, I'll say a few words. I just want to put a plug in. Next month, we're inviting Father Bob Pearson, who joined us tonight at QCF, and he's going to be our guest next month. He's a priest. He's a Benedictine priest who was absolutely courageous in Minnesota in the efforts to defeat the marriage amendment. He came out publicly and clearly, not defying church teachings, but lifting up the church teachings that really offer the rightful dignity to gay and lesbian and transgender and bisexual persons, and also lifted up the teaching of the primacy of conscience that Catholics are so hungry to hear. And so he's going to be joining us next month, and I can't wait. But I wanted to just plug that in, Marianne, because I know Father Pearson personally.
Yes, thanks for the plug, Vic. Sorry, Jim. I had noticed that Bob was online and was glad to see that. And Bob, we're really looking forward to having you next month and hearing what I'm sure will be a powerful story. Victor, thank you so much for leading this conversation tonight. Clearly, there's lots of interest in this topic. Your story is very compelling. And I would really invite others who are interested in this to check on the links page along the top of your menu. Logan has put up links for the Dignity USA website, nice. The Young Adult Caucus, the convention, lots of things you need. For folks who are going to be able to come to the Minneapolis convention in July, please consider coming to the leadership training the afternoon before the official start of the convention, the afternoon of July 4th, where a panel of young adult leaders within Dignity will be talking from a variety of perspectives about, some of the kinds of things that Victor touched on, and more about what we as Dignity and as a movement for justice can do for young adults, Catholics, and other LGBTQ people. Victor, thanks so much again for joining us. Jim, great job as always. And to our participants, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for enlivening the discussion with your comments and questions and all the great networking going on in the text box. That's always just wonderful nice. To see alumni connecting with each other, folks from nice. The same geography, making connections, folks reaching out for tips and places to connect. This is really what we're about, and I'm glad that it's happening. You will...
Marianne, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And for folks who would like to share this conversation with people who weren't able to make it tonight, we will be sending out the link to the recording of this session. And so please go ahead and pass that on to folks you think would be interested and help spread the word about this series. We do hope you'll come back again next month for Bob Pearson. And then after that, Delphine, who is a frequent participant and a very active questionnaire. Delphine and his mother will be joining us for the next, the QCF session after that. That should be really very lively and very interesting. We also appreciate your feedback on the survey that you'll be sent so we can help to continue to improve this series, and we particularly look forward to any suggestions you have about guests or kinds of folks you'd like to hear from as this series moves forward. And again, I ask you to really consider becoming a member of Dignity USA, supporting our mission, our work, programs like this, programs that we do on the ground, our publications, all of the many things that Dignity USA is about. If finances are an issue, we welcome your membership at a discounted rate or a pay-as-you-go. You can work that out with us. We really want you to be a part of our community and to feel pride that you are a part of bringing programs like this to the broader LGBTQ and community of faith. So thank you very, very much for your participation. We hope to see you again next month. And again, Jim and Victor, thank you so much for a very provocative, enlightening, and prayerful, in many ways, discussion.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.